what to do. So I think maybe there was a little bit of murmuring around, and maybe more, the church was a little big, and maybe we needed another minister. Maybe we should get somebody who was kind of, took some of the responsibility. And so there was a young man named
Nick Cardale.
Nick Cardale, who was just had a little church out on Long Island, and maybe it would be a good idea if he came and was an interim, would help more. I think Mort wanted to be a minister, and so in a kind of a way, Nick came and helped, and then Mort felt that even with the minister, it would probably be better if he resigned and took a church that wasn't quite as big and quite as had as many things to run. And so then Nick became the minister. This caused kind of an uproar, because I'm not sure whether that was it or not. I think it was, this was done in what you would say was maybe not a very democratic way, but they felt that a lot of people wanted Mort to stay, and yet he was not really able to, because of his heart, to keep on. And so in a way he resigned, and it was not a question of voting, by the way. I guess the Board of Trustees voted his resignation, or he said he'd resign. And Nick came in. We missed Mort. Mort became convinced in the end that the real thing to bind people together was love. And he used to talk about that, and it was, his sermons are somewhat simplified, and
did he use the Lord's Prayer during that period?
no, I don't remember. I can't remember. No, I don't think so. Because I was so startled when they started using the Lord's Prayer sometimes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. No, I don't think. No, Mort was when we had a terrible time defining Unitarianism, and Mort's definition that he got from somewhere was a great big oblong blur. So we went along with that for a while. I think if you pull those curtains there, see, then the light would be better, maybe. Anyhow, so there was Mort went up to Northeastern in Massachusetts, and he was there for a while, and then he did die quite young. He had, I think we all loved Mort. He was very, he had a very simple, nice way. He liked everybody. They had, he and Ellie always had a New Year's Day party, and they had two big bowls of, some had alcohol and some didn't. And everybody went to their house, which was just around the corner from here, just the next block, small, but they were very cordial, and they had two sons.
Was that 1415 Putnam?
That was 1415 Putnam. Yeah. And it was really, it was our what do you call it? Not parish hall, but whatever you call the minister's house. It really went downhill. nobody really took care of it very well. The next minister lived there, and John Evans, after the Cardells left.
I noticed there was a period when it looks like there was no minister for a little while. Was there a little void between, after Nick Cardell left, before John Evans came in? Or do you remember?
I remember Nick, I remember Grizz and I went to Florida for 2 weeks in February, and when we came back, I had this call from Virginia Goldman. She said, "I've got to talk to you right away as soon as you come back." And when I called her, she said, "Nick has resigned, and we don't know why." And he won't say. He says it's time that he should leave, and then it turned out that in the end, he was leaving he and his wife were separating, and she wanted to stay in the house because her children were in school. I think one was still in school, and she was teaching in high school. So Nick left at the end of the year.
Did he end up marrying somebody from those?
He married the woman that he was in love with, and who was in love with him. And in the end, he moved up to Albany and got a church up there. I don't know whether it was Albany, but it was a church up in northern New York State. And eventually, here's the story of Nick Cardell. Eventually, he got divorced from that woman and married another woman. And he went from the original church to another church in New York State. And when we were looking for a minister, he came down and we asked him to come down and give a sermon because we didn't have anybody. At the time, it was that interim time. And then after he'd given a sermon, everybody said, "Isn't he wonderful? Let's have Nick come back. Why don't we have Nick?" Everybody said, "You can't do that, for heaven's sake." So we didn't. But he was just as attractive and just as good as he'd ever been. And he did. I don't know whether he's retired now, but people who go to the convention see him occasionally. He was his best sermons. He thought that he probably was the first one who showed us that there was a different place in society in Plainfield for black people, and that we were blind to it. And why couldn't they come to the country club? Why should just white people go to the country club? So there was a couple in the church. They were both teachers. And they were very attractive, and they were quite light. And so what did they do? They got so fired up, they called the country club and wanted to make a reservation for lunch, left their names. And by gosh, when they got up there, you can't, no, I'm sorry, that must have been some mistake. And then the place was full of some group, maybe the garden club or something. Look at that. So they well, all right, we'll give you lunch. I guess they gave him lunch in a separate room. I don't know.
That was Mr. Brown?
Mr. Brown.
Yeah.
So Nick stirred things up. We would have been glad to have him stay, but he couldn't really stay and leave his wife and marry somebody else in Plainfield. So he had to go. And that was sad. And so then we did the usual thing that we always do when we lose a minister. We go to the opposite extreme. Now let's not have all this kind of carrying on. Let's get somebody who's more serious, or this, or that, or that. So then we got John Evans, who was Well, unfortunately, I don't know whether he gravitated in his friendships and in the people he knew by people who were not the leaders, the financially heads of the church. And then people began drifting away. And then, though I don't think at any time was there such a drift that it would have broken up the church, the Board of Trustees got a little concerned. And also there was another group of people who did like John Evans. And they were also the people who were rousing, this church is too conservative, we're not doing anything. And so in the course of time, as they say, the trustees met and decided, instead of deciding to talk to John Evans, and say, this is what's happening and we're concerned, they fired him. And well, then he had a number of friends, and they said, they can't fire you like that. This is a terrible thing. You better have we think that this should be a vote in the church. So he called for a vote of the congregation. And what else? So what a sad thing to do.
What happened in the vote of the congregation? He was fired?
Everybody ran around and got all the Unitarians they could lay their hands on and said, you got to come to the meeting, and if you're not a member, well, I better sign up quickly. And so we voted. And some very nasty things were said about John Evans, and then we voted again of kicking him out.
Oh, you did?
And it was the most awful thing to have happen, because the church was so divided that when you left after the sermon, everybody was looking at everybody to see who they talked to. It was really, and my sister and I were on opposite sides. We cried over the telephone.
What's the name of your sister?
My sister's Bobsy Whitlock. Was that a terrible thing to do? And they said some awful things about John Evans, and poor John Evans. Poor John Evans. He went and got another church. He was an interim minister somewhere, we heard, and they loved him. And in the end, which was this fall or winter, there was something in the paper that a Unitarian minister named John Evans had asked that doctor to, where, in Michigan, Ohio, who gives people the wherewithal to suicide.
Oh.
Who's
Dr.
that man?
Kaskovian?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guess-
Yeah.
yeah.
So that was John Evans. John Evans.
Who followed him?
Carl Westman was the next minister.
Carl Westman was the next one. Carl Westman, I think we'd had so much emotional over it that Carl seemed kind of cold. Carl Westman came and he did very well, and he left after 3 years to become head of the denomination in this area. And I think he was kind of, I don't know, I think he was separating from his wife, as a matter of fact, because he was entranced or was with a member of the church. Maybe that was it. I don't know why he left.
Yeah, he was going with Ruth Gray
With
at the
Ruth
time.
Anyhow, know, and after Carl Westman was,
Well, some of the things that Carl Westman was doing was trying to help the blacks in the community, and he was doing draft counseling.
oh,
And,
I didn't know that.
yes, he was doing draft counseling,
Yeah.
but he was trying to help the blacks
Yeah.
in the community also.
You have to
Yeah,
speak up.
you better
Okay.
say it, because if we want it to go on the tape, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just want to add that he was very active within the community, and he was trying to help the blacks become more equal to the whites. And was ashamed that he had to leave.
I think he wanted to.
Well, he was promoted to
Yeah,
district
promoted,
leader.
yeah.
Right, he was
Yeah.
promoted to district leader,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Yeah.
The next person was Ray Bond. He came in September 1969 to June of 1977.
Yeah. Ray was another rather shy man too.
He was quite a poet.
He was a poet. He wrote lovely things. He was very interested in Oriental religions. Do you remember him?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And he attracted, and he gave courses, and he attracted people outside the church, because I know a lot of people came, not a lot of people, but people came to me up from outside the church when he left and said how sorry they were to see him go. I don't think we were very cordial toward Ray. I don't think, by and large, the church was interested in Oriental religions, and is that it? I feel as if this is terribly kind of gossipy.
Well, the church attendance had been declining. I came in 1964, and it bottomed out in 1977. It kept declining gradually. And in 1977, when Ray Bond left, the church attendance was about the smallest that I had ever seen.
Really?
Yes. There was fewer people coming. There was less members. And in 1978, we called Scott Alexander. And with his enthusiasm, the membership started rebuilding, and the finances improved after that. It seemed to be a turnaround of the society, but I also, I'm not sure, but I believe nationally there was more of an interest in Unitarianism,
Yeah.
and the turning around of Unitarianism. So it wasn't just Ray Bond, I don't believe. Scott Alexander, you might want to talk to me about him. He came in 1978, and he was for 10 years in 1988.
Scott was great. Scott was what? Scott was a person who could laugh at himself, you know. It's seldom you have a minister who can laugh at themselves. He was, well, the first thing we noticed was that he was impeccably neat. And when there was a little mark on the church, he'd rush around with a brush or a piece of water or get something to clean it up. But he laughed about it. He said, you know, that's the way I am. And that's the way he was. And we accepted him. And I think because of his acceptance and his humor and his personality, we accepted the fact when he was found out that he was gay, and that he was able to tell the congregation. I don't think it was one of those catastrophic things that split the church. No, we thought, all right, we liked Scott the way he was and the way he is, and let's just go ahead. So something like that could have been you know, have been a great divider. Nobody came up on top. The people who weren't able to put up with it left quietly, but I don't think there were very many. And the people, I thought it was amazing and wonderful that it was that group of people. Though Unitarians are supposed to be very tolerant, they're not very tolerant sometimes, and that there was enough a feeling for him, and enough saying, well, listen, we're Unitarians and we ought to be able to accept this. And so it was of no moment, in a way. I don't know.
Well, Scott Alexander introduced some things to the service that were different. He had the flower communion. He introduced the chalice, and he also introduced a real spirit of enthusiasm. During his tenure, we covered the Robinson window with plastic so that it could be protected in case a stone was thrown through it. We put up more of a security system. And as you say, if there was any dirt any place, Scott himself would clean it up before anybody else could even find it. He was constantly cleaning the church himself, the sexton was always reminded to get this done and get that done. He was very meticulous and tidy. The church grew rapidly again under Scott Alexander through his enthusiasm and the fact that finances were better, and also I believe that the Unitarians as a whole nationally were coming back again and reviving. So it was also a coincidence of that particular period. And Scott went later on to become head of the church of the larger fellowship, which he is right now. And that is the largest church in our denomination. It's a organization or church, if you will, of mostly isolated members that are in remote areas, and they receive sermons and information. And Scott has been traveling around to see some of these people. And there is an active movement to try to get them to form fellowships and churches in these areas. And Scott is responsible for some of that also.
Mm-hmm. I think also when Scott was here, partly because of his homosexuality, we attracted quite a number of gay people to the church. And they have been, by and large, of enormous interest and help. And we value them. And I think that in a way that has changed the church somehow. We've also gotten used to the fact that we can, I hope, that gay people are welcome, and that we're a church that is able to sow all sorts of people. We're not able to attract very many black people, but we've done this. I can't think of... I'd like to say something about Margot.
Margot followed Scott.
No,
Margot followed Scott.
Al Hendrickson followed Scott, the interim minister.
Well, was an interim.
He was an interim, yes.
Well, Lee said about it in the back.
Okay. We'll go on to Margot Campbell Gross, who came in August of 1989 then.
Yeah. Margot was a completely different, something quite new for us. She was English Episcopalian, bringing up, so there was certain amount of
Formality.
that formality. And she raised her arms in blessing at the end of the church, and that upset some people. But it didn't make any difference to her really, so she went ahead. And she was a very good minister, I thought. Some people felt that she, I don't know what some people felt. Anyhow,
She
I
was more
thought
formal, I believe.
probably her formality.
Mhm.
She was a great person for looking after people. If you said you had a headache and had to go to the hospital, she was there. And she looked after her flock very well. And because she was a woman, she had a great deal of compassion. And her sermons, people were not as fond of her sermons. They were sometimes a little unconventional, and she had a way of quoting people that people thought was a little not very I don't want to say scholastic. But anyhow, I was sorry to see her go. So
She never went to college, I don't believe. She went to a carpentry school in England.
yeah,
and
I went to art school.
Art school, and then she went to a seminar, a Unitarian seminar, and graduated from the seminary in the United States.
Yeah, in California, wasn't it?
Yes, I
Yeah.
believe so. I believe it was
Yeah.
Star King, I
Right,
believe that she
right.
graduated from.
Yeah,
So her background is quite different, not having gone to college also.
that's true, that's true. Yeah. Well,
Then after Margot left, we had Paul Sawyer in 1995.
As an interim too.
Yes.
another interim, yeah. Well, Paul at least did something. The other man that we didn't talk about never did anything except sit around. But Paul had all sorts of ideas, and Paul couldn't stop talking. And he was very entertaining, I found, and full of knowledge. And it was just fun to start him going, but some people felt there was a limit. And that if he could just stop so that we weren't in church for an hour and a half, we'd like him better. Now it's not an awful thing to say, but it was true. So.
He seemed to know almost every Unitarian minister in the whole world. And
Paul, well, I think that
He
the
was very
answer
worldly.
about Paul was he never got over the 60s. And all the people who were well known in the 60s, he still knew. And he got them all to come and talk at the church. I was amazed. All our heroes from the 60s were still alive and well and talking. And it was great to hear them again. But nobody was, I guess nobody who had gone through the 60s were thought that was great, but if you had gone, why, you were pleased. Now that, I feel this has been terribly chatty and terribly, I'm afraid, catty. I'm afraid a little bit. What do I want to say? I haven't been too tactful.
well, we're trying to get more
Hide
of
it for about 20 years, will you?
we're trying to get more of the human interest. The building, the history of the building has been very well recorded, but the people behind it